Great changes have taken place there, and nearly all of the familiar landmarks are gone. No more are the fine dairy farms and beautiful acres of croplands. Instead, the ground has nearly everywhere been torn up with huge holes and excavations for buildings. Even the roads which we have known for so long are being torn up, and soon not even a trace of them will remain. In place of them, there will be streets connecting hundreds of buildings, and railroad tracks everywhere are being laid to provide for the transportation of raw materials and manufactured goods. The high wages paid at the plant boosted the local economy because workers had more money to spend, and some of it was spent in town. A Rosemount merchant described the effects on him. As far as my own business goes, I know it was a break for me. Gopher Ordnance Works brought people in, and they were getting paid every week, and they spent their money in town. Not many started a savings account. They just spent it as soon as they got it. It had been so long since they'd had any money, they didn't know how to handle it. Another area citizen asserted that the Rosemount liquor store got as rich as a hoot owl because plant workers cashed their checks there on Friday nights and spent a portion of them on the premises. Additional capital flooded the economy when local businesses were awarded subcontracts by DuPont. But not all the economic efforts were beneficial to the community. Wartime rent and price inflation, already present, were further aggravated, as were scarcities of consumer goods. The federal government imposed price and rent controls to counteract such trends. The increased supply of money in the Rosemount economy put pressure on businesses to enlarge their inventories, and for some local proprietors, such pressures were difficult to adjust to. It took a fair amount of time to get used to that many people all at once here in inventory. They were from all parts of the country and wanted merchandise that we didn't have, and it was during the war and merchandise was hard to get. Rosemount merchants and farmers had difficulty competing with GOW for workers because of the higher wages paid there, and farmers complained so loudly that GOW announced that it would no longer hire farm workers. One Rosemount mother lamented that the high school girls had been spoiled by the $100 per month they earned at plant jobs requiring no experience. Dakota County's loss of tax revenues on the 11,500 acres was another problem that the community leaders needed to resolve. And the county's coffers were further strained from increased bills for repairing the county's overused roads. Plant workers often brought their families with them when they migrated to Rosemount. As a result, enrollments increased, overcrowding area schools, which were short of both teachers and classroom materials. Local officials later received federal aid to help ease these burdens. The War Department's hopes for a January 1943 Gopher Ordnance Works opening were undermined from the very start by a series of problems. One was the exceptionally wet summer of 1942, when precipitation from May 1st to October 1st was the heaviest on record, causing impassable roads, soil erosion, and drainage difficulties. Other delays in acquisition of construction materials and equipment pushed the opening date back to October 12, 1943, when plant officials succeeded in convincing the Ordnance Department to improve their priority, ranging from AA4 to AA3. When the plant was about 73% complete in March 1943, further trouble about the uncertain nature of its future loomed. As stories circulated among workers, officials urged workers to quash the gossip, but early in April, part of the construction was halted and employees were laid off. A few days later, Minnesota 1st District Congressman August H. Anderson announced that he had been informed by a War Department general that GOW would soon be placed on a standby status, to be operated only on an emergency basis. On April 16th, the War Department announced that some of the GOW land would be leased to bidders interested in using it for farming purposes. Finally, in July, the department gave belated credence to the gossip by placing the entire Rosemount plant, along with 7 other plants around the country, on a standby status. Officials said Gopher Ordnance Works was not needed because the nation's other powder manufacturing plants were producing more than originally anticipated, and the current demand for artillery explosives was lower than expected. The giant war plant stood idle for the remainder of 1943, and in January 1944, work started to dismantle and ship much of its equipment and materials to other defense installations. Life in Rosemount returned to normal as thousands of workers, trailer homes, and traffic jams disappeared, although some workers stayed on to carry out dismantling operations and administrative and security services. But Rosemount's restored tranquility was short-lived. The War Department announced in July 1944 that GOW's standby order was to be removed, and it was to be refitted once again for powder production scheduled to begin as soon as possible. The unexpectedly heavy use of artillery by American forces on the Italian and other fronts forced the government to lift the standby order, and engineers hoped the plant would be ready for powder production in January 1945. In December, it was announced that a $60 million expanse program designed to double GOW's production capabilities was to be launched, and the plant's commanding officer underscored the importance of the project by asserting, "Hell, the war is far from over, the hard fighting is still to come, and Eisenhower is crying for ammunition." Throughout the rest of the war, plant officials had trouble attracting workers for Gopher Ordnance Works jobs, and when powder production finally began in early 1945, they intensified their recruitment efforts. After Germany collapsed in April 1945, 2 of the plant's 3 scheduled production lines were once again placed on standby status, but cannon and rifle powder manufacturing continued to support the war in the Pacific. The labor shortage problems continued, however, and looking for help in the recruitment program, plant officials invited 60 newspaper editors for a thorough tour of their facility. In the final months of the war, work at GOW slowly lost momentum. The final order to close the plant was issued in August 13, 1945, the day before the Japanese signed their unconditional surrender. But not until October 10, 1945, was the last lot of cannon powder packed. Whether or not GOW powder ever made it to the front lines in Europe or the Pacific is not known, but ironically, by the end of the war, the Rosemount plant had become the government's 3rd most expensive, costing over $115 million in 1942. When GOW was dismantled in 1945, its surplus equipment and materials were liquidated by the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. 2 years later, the GOW site was deeded to the University of Minnesota, and since then, in addition to a portion of it being rented to farmers, the land and its remaining structures have been used for a variety of university-sponsored research projects and other programs conducted by private and governmental institutions, leasing space on the site. Throughout the war and ever since, public sentiment in Rosemount has been mixed on GOW. Commenting on the reactions of her neighbors to the coming of GOW, one Rosemount woman said, "For being such a big thing, the people took it rather calmly and made the best of it. They figured it was wartime, and I suppose they were all happy they didn't lose sons. Things are different during wartime." When the plant was first idled in 1943, some residents were glad that life had returned to normal, but others lamented that the plant had not become a more permanent factor in the local economy, and that the loss of 84 productive farms for an empty war plant was not a beneficial exchange for the community. The cynicism felt by some of the displaced farmers was further aggravated by the erratic history of the plant. One member of the group recalled, "The thing that really galls all of us people that were ordered out is the fact that they never really needed the plant. It was a waste. They did manufacture some powder, but if any of it was actually used in the war effort, I don't know of it." Such sentiments, accusations of mismanagement at GOW and other plants that closed around the country had reached the War Department. officials, and Undersecretary of War Robert P. Patterson responded to the House Committee on Military Affairs. The closing of these plants had no doubt brought inconvenience and dislocation to local communities, and has directed public attention to idleness, which may be inappropriately termed waste. Had these facilities not been courageously conceived, planned, and constructed, and had those fortunes of war continued to be adverse, the great destruction and waste of both manpower and money caused by having too little, too late, would have brought such tremendous suffering that the present inactivities fade into insignificance. Americans have thus been asked to accept the failures of the United States military establishment because of the tremendous uncertainty of the country's future during war years. But such acceptance should not prevent the story of such failures from being told along with the successes. So that's just a little bit of the book. I hope you enjoyed that reading. Go to the link I'm going to post about this Minnesota history featured article, Gopher Ordnance Works Condemnation, Construction, and Community Response by Patricia L. Dooley. Again, thanks for watching. Have a great day.